Class, we're going to talk today in our third lecture for this week about syllables and stress. This is going to be a brief introduction because we're going to cover this topic later on in the semester. Okay, so let's get started. Okay, so the purpose of today's lecture is to start to understand syllable structures and gain a basic understanding of stress. Okay, so this little post here is talking about how if we put the stress on the wrong syllables, it's going to change the meaning of what we're trying to convey. So I'm just going to read it out loud. So I was talking to my dad about Guardians of the Galaxy, and when I mentioned Chris Pratt, my dad sighs and says, I don't know how parents could be mean enough to name their child after a fried rodent. And I sat there looking really confused, and then he whispered, crisp rat. So as you could see, if you don't put the syllables on the right, don't put the stress on the right syllables, it can change what you're trying to say. So syllables are not really well defined, but at a minimum, they have to be composed of a vowel plus usually some surrounding consonants, but not always. That's just why it's hard to define because there's always exceptions to the rule. The way that I teach it to students that I'm working with is a syllable is a word or part of a word with at least one vowel pattern. There's actually 7 different types of syllables in the English language. The exception to having a vowel is a consonant LE syllable. So, for example, in the word table, the second syllable, bowl, is made up of just consonants, but that's really the only exception. All other vowels that we're going to study have all other consonants, sorry, all other syllables we're going to study have a vowel in them. Okay, if we are transcribing, we're going to do a lot of transcription in this class. Syllable boundaries are marked with a period, as you can see in this example of the word again. And what we learn about syllables in the English language is not necessarily applicable to other languages. So syllable structures are not universal across languages. Stress is related to syllables. Okay, so in other languages, so if any of you are bilingual, I'm sure some of you are. So for example, if you speak Spanish, the syllables have the same length. Okay. In English, we're actually not a syllable timed language, we're a stress timed language. So in our language, syllables can be louder and longer, depending on the word. If we have a word where there's a syllable with an unstressed vowel, it's usually transcribed with the schwa symbol. So we're going to talk about schwa later on when we talk about vowels and we talk about transcription. So just to kind of break it down into the different components of a syllable, the nucleus is the part that has to be in a syllable. So as I said before, at its most simplest, a vowel. So a vowel makes up the nucleus. The exception being the syllabic consonant, which is consonant LA. This can vary by languages though, but in English, the vowel is making up the nucleus for the most part. The onset is really just a fancy word for the consonant that comes before the vowel in the syllable. So for example, the word go, the onset would be the G before the O. The coda is what comes after the vowel in the syllable, and codas are not obligatory. So if we have the word go, there is no consonant after the O. It's an open syllable. Open syllables do not have a consonant at the end, so they do not have a coda. So that's not necessary in every syllable, okay? All right, so if we were going to map this out, so this is a little drawing of a syllable tree for the word strand. So the nucleus in the word strand is the vowel. So this is transcribed into IPA, which we're going to be learning about. So the nucleus is the vowel A. the onset is what comes before that vowel. So that would be the consonant cluster, STR. And then the coda is the consonants that follow that vowel. So in this case, for the word strand, it's going to be the ND. So the nucleus and the coda themselves form what's called the rhyme. And in this case, RIME, not RH, right? So it's spelled differently, but similar concept, right? So if we were going to have rhyming words, we could say strand rhymes with a band, right? So that ending of the nucleus and the coda that makes up the rhyme is going to be the same. What's going to be different in those examples is the onset. Okay. Don't get too hung up on this. As I said, we're going to look at this in more detail. This is just an introduction. And I apologize that my PowerPoint is not moving. Okay. So as I said, an open syllable has no consonant following the vowel, so no coda. So an example here is a consonant vowel shape. So my, in this case, the Y is operating as a vowel, not a consonant. There is no coda. If it's a closed syllable, then we have to have a consonant following the vowel. So in the word cup, that P is following the vowel. We also talk about heavy syllables versus light syllables. Heavy syllables we think of as having a long vowel or a diphthong, which we're going to talk about in detail when we talk about vowels. And a light syllable has no coda or has a short vowel. So one of the ways we distinguish between closed and open syllables is closed syllables have at least one vowel followed by one or more consonants, and the vowel is short. Open syllables do not have a consonant following the vowel, and the vowel is long. So that's a good way to distinguish between open and closed is those differences. Okay. As I said, syllable structures are different among different languages. In general, among languages, syllables often have onsets and not codas. So the most common would be what we call canonical syllables. So if you think about babies babbling, they babble in canonical syllables. So that's consonant V. Some languages may require an onset and prohibit a coda, but no languages require codas. As a matter of fact, Hawaiian does not have any codas, so they don't have consonants following the vowels. An example here is a different syllable shape. Spanish does not allow words to start with the SC cluster. So what that means is that when someone tries to pronounce a word, they're going to try and repair it based on what they know from their own language. So for example, school is going to be pronounced as school. Because they're going to try and make sure that it's consistent with the syllable patterns in their own language. Okay, so that's the end of our very brief discussion about syllables. One of the things we're going to do is practice counting out syllables. So we're going to talk about that when we meet in class. Okay, so that's it for today. And I'm going to end this recording.